Welcome to Sizzle Fantasy Sports, the channel with the most sizzling hot fantasy takes and analysis, presented by your host, Gavin.
Rodgers clean pocket, throws the middle to Yato, Devontae, touchdown, and a dagger!
How's it going, and welcome back to the SFS channel. I'm Gavin, back with another late week mock draft for you all. As requested last week, I'm going to be doing the 11th pick here in this week's mock. Next week, I've got the 5th overall pick that I'll be doing for another one of our great viewers that requested that position for us. So before I get into the video here, if you have a certain draft position you would like me to draft out of here on these mock drafts, put that down in the comment section below. I'll get back to you, let you know. And if I've already done that one, I'll refer you to the video where I did that one. And obviously, I can always make an updated version as well, as ADP currently is changing by the day here. So if you got any other fantasy-related questions, put those down in that comment section below as well. And make sure to go check out some of our social medias that you see at the top left-hand corner of your screen. Without further ado, though, I'm not wasting any time today. Let's get right into today's mock draft. Okay, as I mentioned in the opener here, we're going to be going with that 11th draft spot. So picking at the end of the first round here, we're going with the light mode on Sleeper Fantasy today for this video. If you haven't used Sleeper Fantasy before, I would highly recommend it. I think it's one of the better drafting tools out there, and their ADP is really great. It's a bit challenging throughout the offseason when there's not really accurate data, but as we get farther and farther here and closer to the season, we've got some really good stuff to work with here. So here at the 11th spot, we've got an interesting start to the way this board is playing out. Also, I hope that my face cam isn't covering up too much of my screen here. I think I fixed the issue for the most part last video, but I was picking closer to the top of the board. So regardless, though, 3 running backs off the board to start things off. Dalvin Cook, CMC, and Barkley. That's very interesting. Saquon coming off an ACL over Kamara, Derrick Henry, and Nick Chubb. I'm not so sure how I feel about that. I really like this as a half PPR mock draft. Again, we try and keep things really balanced here on the channel. That's what I'd recommend for all of you starting up fantasy leagues this year. If you've done standard or PPR in the past, if you've got any issues with that scoring format, absolutely 100%, I would recommend you 2 flex half PPR leagues and get rid of those kickers. The half PPR is going to give you a really nice balance between wide receivers and running backs, and not give a particular benefit or boost to one position over the other based off of who's catching more passes. And then that second flex spot, it just makes fantasy more fun. If you've ever lost due to a wild kicker week, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. So there's definitely a very, very interesting spot where kickers can make or break your week, and as a really serious fantasy player, that can be quite annoying. So that second flex requires a little bit more thought, a little bit more attention to detail here at the top of the draft board and throughout the process when you're looking to make those late round draft picks that can potentially be game changers for your team. So I've had some really interesting questions about how to play out this 11th draft spot and how to play out the back end of the board in general. And I just actually responded to a comment about half hour ago that, at least at the time of this video, that asked about would I take Travis Kelce or Stephon Diggs at the spot here. And I'm actually going to start things off. Based off of ADP right now, Travis Kelce's falling down a little bit, and he's actually got an ADP in the second round, and Stephon Diggs is just 1 spot ahead of him here. But I'm going to fade running back here. I'm not too overly in love with Aaron Jones at that spot. I don't think that we need to go Aaron Jones here, and I think that this is going to play out an interesting strategy here. Would I say that you can't pick Aaron Jones here? Absolutely not. I think it's a very, very fair spot to take him here. I think that Aaron Jones is kind of the last running back on this list right now of running backs you can feel confident about in that number 1 spot on a week-to-week basis, but we don't know about Aaron Rodgers yet, if he's going to be back there. I don't know if that changes things too much, but maybe the offense loses some efficiency. They're not in the field as much. I do think Aaron Jones will see an increase in volume this season with Jamal Williams heading to Detroit. But nonetheless here, we're going to try things out here by taking Travis Kelce, the tight end 1 from 2020 here at the top of this draft board. And it looks like, boom, right there. So I just talked about this in the comment section. I said that Stephon Diggs is probably, there's a chance he falls down to you in the second round if you pass on him in the first. I absolutely think that he is a receiver who should be going in the first round right now. I'd take a Stephon Diggs over a DeAndre Hopkins any day. If you look at the situations they're in, I think that there's more opportunity, at least out of the quarterback stylistic play, for a Stephon Diggs, and they both have very, very good quarterback play, and they both are very talented receivers, and both have tougher division matchups, but I just overall like the combination of a Josh Allen and a Stephon Diggs a tad bit more than a D-Hop and a Kyler Murray. And we saw, and it comes down, honestly, I trust Josh Allen more than I trust Kyler Murray. And, Kyler Murray has maybe a little bit of a better running attack and whatnot, but he's smaller. We saw him get banged up last season. That's a tough division in the NFC West that I think could really go south. And we see D-Hop, I wouldn't say he struggles because he produces better than most receivers against the Jalen Ramsey twice a year. But it's a very real concern. It's a very real tough matchup. And yeah, Diggs has to go against guys like Stephon Gilmore, Xavier Howard, and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of preference. It comes down to me slightly liking Diggs a bit more than Hopkins. So I'd actually take him over D-Hop here at the end of the first round. If we're talking about those two, I don't think I'm too prepared to take a Diggs over an Adams or a Tyreek Hill. But the strategy, nonetheless, that I want to play out for you all here, A.J. Brown is another receiver who I think right now, based off of the players on his team and that bad defense, is going to have a monstrous year. But right here, I really like Stephon Diggs. So I'm going to take Stephon Diggs, pass on Aaron Jones once again, and I'm just going to kind of illustrate here what does happen if I go tight end receiver here. I've got myself two super high upside pass catchers. What I want to figure out here and illustrate for you guys what happens when I pass on running back in the first two rounds. This is generally something that I do not promote. I don't suggest that fantasy players go about this method because I think when you look at the running back crop here, there's not too many great names left and not too many players I'd be ecstatic about drafting here. So we see a lot of running backs: Miles Sanders, J.K. Dobbins, Najee Harris, Austin Eckler, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, and Antonio Gibson come off the board since our last pick. I probably have to double dip here. And again, I talked about this with the viewer that was in the comment section the day before that you are seeing this. So the time I'm recording this video, nonetheless, it's probably confusing for you guys. But I talked about how if you go tight end, then wide receiver, you almost force your hand here. And you have to pick running back twice here probably, because by the time you come back at the end of the fifth round, that running back crop is going to be paper thin, and there is not going to be good names out there that you can feel confident about when you have to roll out there and deploy probably two backs on a week-to-week basis in your lineup based off of your settings and whatnot. Now, we do have the best tight end in fantasy right now, and I think that something I'll discuss later on next week or maybe even this weekend is George Kittle versus Darren Waller for that tight end 2 spot. I think we got some really, really great value and upside out of Kelsey at the end of the first here, and I really like what we did with Diggs as, in my opinion, a top 5 wide receiver finisher as long as he plays the whole season this year. We've got great upside. We've got really, really nice playmakers and the ability to go out there and have burst games that win us our fantasy weeks, but we really need running back now. So we've got DeAndre Swift, Chris Carson, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs as the main players here that are kind of in contention for this draft spot. And basically, Team 12 holds our fate in their hands with their back-to-back picks here. So I think my first pick here is probably going to end up being DeAndre Swift. And there's a lot of concerns right now. And actually, Todd Gurley is working out or visiting with the Lions this weekend. That is very concerning to me because with Jamal Williams already being in that backfield, it already makes me question whether or not he's going to get very many goal line carries. If Todd Gurley comes to town, I can almost assure you no goal line carries for DeAndre Swift. Maybe he'll see like 1 or 2 every couple weeks, but unless he punches it in and really capitalizes on that opportunity, we're looking at a low touchdown count for DeAndre Swift next year, and he got banged up his fair share of times. I really like David Montgomery here, but I think that for the time being, Todd Gurley hasn't signed as of the time we're recording this video. We're going DeAndre Swift here as our RB1. Super great pass catching upside, super great playmaking ability in space, really shifty, really elusive. And there you go, David Montgomery goes the next pick after us. So Chris Carson and Josh Jacobs, those are really the 2 names I'm looking at here. Maybe the next guy I'd consider, honestly, is a Travis Etienne down here, because I think a lot of these other guys have situational play styles and opportunity to make plays for their offenses. Myles Gaskin's a guy I'm really concerned about this year with injuries and whatnot. and a potentially crowded backfield with some committee-style deployment of backs there, but we need another running back, and I'm not a Josh Jacob guy, whatsoever. I'm actually going to write an article for my website, sizzlefantasy.com. If you haven't checked that out, you should definitely do so, about how the signing of Kenyon Drake has basically derailed Josh Jacobs' fantasy value altogether. Before, he was super low upside, didn't catch any passes, not a very explosive back, but he was still going at the late first, early second round. Now that he's going to lose some touches, lose some of that workload, absolutely not. Josh Jacobs is not worth your investment. Chris Carson's an injury guy too, though. This is a player who does it all. He is a 3-down back, a guy that Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson, they love him in that offense. But he hasn't been all that much dependable because he has had some significant injuries and missed time. So I'm going to go and take Chris Carson with that being said, because the other options on the table aren't that great. He does have really nice touchdown upside, though. They use him on the goal line. He can catch passes. He's been a very effective and productive receiver throughout his career. So you see all this team starting to play out here. I don't love those 2 running backs at all, because I think that if we're going to go back to my strategy here, this video and this mock draft, the strategy I'm approaching with this episode with, is to kind of walk you through and explain how some of these situations play out here. I think you have to walk away from rounds 1 or 2. You'll hear me say this in every single mock draft that you watch. You have to walk away with at least 1 running back in rounds 1 or 2. I'm not going to sit back here and tell you to draft running back 3 straight rounds in a row, because that criminally derails your team's upside and limits your ceiling for what you can do on a week-to-week basis. Because running backs, ultimately, unless you're picking here in a top 3 spot, are not going to be the players that win your fantasy weeks. They just keep you afloat, because it's really hard to find good running backs. And if you don't have good enough running backs, your team isn't going to be consistent enough and be able to put up points on a regular basis. But if you don't invest into other positions with higher upside, you're not going to be able to go out there and win those tough weeks against those other really good teams in your league. So in this situation, I've got 2 really nice upside backs here in Swift and Carson, but there's a significant amount of risk that these 2 guys carry, and that's not something you love to see out of your top 2 players at a position, especially one as difficult to find as running back. So I probably need another receiver. I might even consider going running back here, depending on the options. We've got a late 5th round pick here, the 5'11", and it looks like there are some really solid names here at the wide receiver position. Cooper Kupp's a guy I just talked about in a previous video as a must-own wide receiver. Same with Brandon Ayuk. These are 2 players I really, really like at the spot. Cooper Kupp, I think, is in for a big year with Matthew Stafford and the development of that offense. I think there's going to be a lot more downfield shots and a lot more opportunities for playmakers to make splash and impact plays on the field. I really am at a loss right now. I'm not sure where I want to go with this pick. I'm afraid that if I let Travis Etienne walk with this pick here, he's going to sneak down to one of these other teams, and I might potentially end up getting burned and left high and dry at the running back position. Raheem Mostert, super injury prone. James Robinson, I've talked about him as a really intriguing player. The more we hear about this gadget role from Travis Etienne, the more and more skittish I am to draft him in rookie dynasty drafts. But there's nothing saying you've already got some risky running backs here. Just start throwing dart throws at the board here and try and find a high upside guy that hits for you and gives you that upside that you really, really need at the position and are looking for. So I'm going to take Travis Etienne here. I'm not going to let him fall. I think that it's very safe to assume that this team on the back end here might snatch him up from me. So I'm going to go Travis Etienne, and then hopefully either Kupp or Ayuk will be left for me. And there is Brandon Ayuk. So I'm not going to waste any time. I'll go ahead and make that selection there. Ayuk is one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football, finishing off last season. He had some really nice touchdown production. I forget how many games in a row. It was like 5 or 6. He scored a touchdown at the end of the year. His yardage was really nice. His usage is really good. I talked about him as well in that must-own wide receivers video as a player who is not necessarily going to come out there and score 30 points and have 200 yards receiving, but maybe he has 120 yards receiving on 6 catches and has 3 rushes for another 30 yards and a touchdown. So he's using a variety of ways. I talked about him as a wide receiver like Robert Woods with a higher ceiling. I just really like what he does as a playmaker, and his routes are highly underrated. I don't think people realize how actually good of a receiver he is. He's not just a gadget guy in Shanahan's offense. So that's something really impressive I wanted to touch on. So referring to the ADP here, and this is not what we go by at all. We like to find value. We like to find players who have really great situations. I talk a lot about how we have to value situation over talent sometimes in fantasy football, because if you find a guy in the right spot, fantasy points will fall into your lap regardless of how talented they are or not. Look at a guy like Travis Fulgham last year. He was a gold mine for like 4 or 5 weeks when the Eagles had no one else to throw the ball to. As soon as they got guys back from injury, Fulgham disappeared and was a ghost. But you found a player in the right situation. He produced while you needed him to, and was honestly a borderline wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 producer for those few weeks there. Take advantage of guys while you have the opportunity to. That's my message for you here in this video. Another player I've talked about I love is Brandon Cooks here. It looks like we can wait a little bit longer on him, though. I don't want to bullishly invest in him too early here, but I'd hate to see him fall. Jamar Chase still on the board here. That's another player I love. Looking at the quarterback crop, I think it's a bit too early to invest into the players that are left on the board. You've seen your top-end guys kind of fall here, so I think this might be a time where we go with a late quarterback strategy, and there's plenty of guys. Value will fall, and we'll get a player that can be a top 12 starter, in my opinion, within the next 2 or 3 rounds here. So I'm not going to overly invest into that spot here. It probably wouldn't hurt to take a 4th running back. Like I said, it kind of handcuffs you and kind of handicaps your team here at the back end of the rounds, because I don't feel great about my running back crew right now. I've got 3 guys, all with super high upside, and don't get me wrong, that's great. They could be amazing producers here, but there's also a chance that Chris Carson misses 8 weeks. DeAndre Swift misses 5. He had injuries last season. Maybe he doesn't get any touchdown production this year. Maybe Travis Etienne is used like a Percy Harvin or that Kadarius Toney role that they wanted there in Jacksonville, and he doesn't really ever see real volume. So there is significant risk with each one of the running backs I've taken here. That's why I'm a huge advocator for taking at least one in those top 2 rounds. So looking back on this, I would advise, in retrospect here, take a Kelsey with that first pick if you want, and swing back and take your Aaron Jones that fell here. Or even reverse it. If you want to go Aaron Jones, maybe Kelsey falls here and is taken at that bend, and you take a Diggs. Just find a way to make sure that you don't end up getting burned there. And it looks like I actually just got auto-drafted. We're going to pause the draft here. Nope. We don't want this to happen. I got auto-picked, so I don't want that to happen. All right, so we paused that there. Kenyon Drake, I never in a million years would have drafted him, so we're going to take him off the board. I got a bit caught up in my rambling there. So we're going to take these guys off the board here, backtrack a little bit, and continue evaluating the players that were on the board there for us. So a lot of receivers went there. Tom Brady, Robert Tonyan went there at the very back end of that bend here. We're all paused up now, so I've got basically every player that was available on the board there at that spot. I'm really thinking about a Brandon Cooks or Jamar Chase here. This is the back end of the 7th round. These guys are both typically middle of the 8th round players, but I think that the overall output I'm going to get from these guys are better than the other players who are technically ranked ahead of them in this current ADP format. I'm not overly in love with these running backs. Maybe I take one here before the end of this process. But I think, yeah, so here I'm going to go with a Jamar Chase, I think, is who I'm going to end up taking here before my second back-to-back pick. It's really close between Jamar Chase and a Brandon Cooks for me. I love both of these guys because they're in such bad situations from a team perspective that you look at a Brandon Cooks who's in a nightmare of a spot. Okay, so then there I just got auto-drafted again, and they took Jalen Hurts from me. That's fine. We'll let it go since I already got buzzed for that once. I had to turn my auto pick off there. So I love the prospect of a Brandon Cooks because of that situation. They're going to be trailing, throwing the ball a ton to try and keep up and catch up in those games. And I think that is a recipe for a very productive fantasy receiver. When you look at players in the past that have done that maybe they haven't had the best team situation, but they have been able to put up really great numbers because they're trying to catch up, because they're trailing and whatnot. Look at the Falcons receiver core last year. Calvin Ridley was exceptional, even with Julio Jones on the field, just because they were throwing so much, trying to stay in games late. And then my pick there with Jamar Chase, you get a quarterback in Joe Burrow who is as talented as he was, as good as he was as a rookie, that had as much production as he did, he had some good receivers, don't get me wrong, but you add in the guy who he had the most success with in his college career, and that receiver won the Blitnikoff Award, that being Jamar Chase, obviously. That's going to translate so well. It's going to be a day one. It's just going to click. They're going to they're going to have a lot of connections between a volume perspective. I'm assuming that Joe Burrow probably would still trust Jamar Chase more than a Tyler Boyd or a T. Higgins because he really didn't play that many games with them last year. I'd expect him to be there, his go-to guy in crunch time in the red zone. Whatever the case may be, Jamar Chase is going to see a lot of balls thrown his way next year. I'll touch on that Jalen Hurts pick really quickly here before hopefully I don't get auto-picked again. I should have a pick lined up before I start talking. This seems to be a recurring issue episode to episode. Maybe I should give myself a 5-minute timer so I don't keep blowing this. But Jalen Hurts, mobile quarterback, again, a bad football team. That's a recipe for really great quarterback success. Not what you're looking for out of a running back. You would rather honestly have a running back that plays for a good team, that plays with the lead and is running that clock out, whereas your quarterback play, you want guys that are going to be tossing the rock around because they're losing football games. And the Eagles might not be super far off. They do have really nice defensive pieces, but I think that they're ultimately not going to be a plus 500 team. This is probably a team with a losing record again this season, trailing in games. Jalen Hurts has that rushing upside, which you love. Add in Devontae Smith. For now, Zach Ertz is still there, Dallas Goedert, and Jalen Reagor in year 2. So he's got some stuff to work with. Miles Sanders, even out of the backfield, could be a nice receiving threat. There's a good amount of stuff surrounding Jalen Hurts that I like. Now, if I was making the pick, I see a player like a Matt Stafford and a Matt Ryan here. I might honestly entertain and like those players more. Matt Ryan's got Julio Jones for the time being, as this video is being recorded. Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, that's a great mashup of talent and a really bad defense as well. I'd probably waited and taken Matty Ice over him, but right now I got to make a split-second choice here. 20 seconds. Time's clocking down on me here. And I'm actually going to do something that, again, is probably not all that usual that you see here, but I really need... Oh, man. Okay, all right. We're going to take Devontae Smith here. Time's up. Oh, I got it right at the horn there. I got Devontae Smith. So I was about to get auto-drafted yet again. I get Devontae Smith here, another rookie receiver, and I think that this is starting to become a trend here. At the end of your drafts, take rookie receivers. They have super high upside and are absolutely not guarantees. Maybe they don't pan out until the back half of the season, but these are players that at the end of the day, look at Justin Jefferson last year. He wasn't the wide receiver 1 in redraft or dynasty leagues. He wasn't being picked as the first guy off the board. He was probably wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 for a lot of teams last season, and he comes out and pops. And while Devontae Smith is probably wide receiver 2 this year, he's got a really great situation. I'm not sure, besides him and Jamar Chase, if any of these other wideouts have the chance to walk in and be the number 1 on day 1. I think Devontae Smith instantly trumps a Jalen Reagor. I think Jamar Chase, even though I love Boyd's and Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, he comes out there and he's the best player on the field. So these are players that are gonna demand targets. They're gonna demand the volume in the receiving game and demand work from their young quarterbacks. So they're at the end of the day gonna be some really nice options. I do really need another running back here. I was gonna take Trey Sermon, and then I saw his ADP, so I figured I could wait a bit longer on him. Just a couple days ago, he was a player who's going at the back end of the 10th round, so there's not very many other running backs I see that I love and would really feel the need to take over him. Tevin Coleman, who I have again talked about a lot as a player who should be going earlier in drafts, is still there on the board. It'd honestly be a shame for me to let him walk at this point since I saw he was there. I want to take Trey Sermon because I think I talked about this in my must-own running back video a couple days back. I said that Raheem Mostert's an injury waiting to happen, and Jeff Wilson's good for a couple 4-touchdown games every year. He seems to have like 5 carries for 12 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's just what Jeff Wilson does. And I said he's also bound to get injured as well. And unfortunately, the day I posted that, it was recorded a day prior. He tore his meniscus, I believe it was, and is out 4 to 6 months now. So Trey Sermon, who was the third stringer, is now vaulted up into that RB2 spot on that roster. You'll see him eventually this season, and he's going to put on a show. I think that he's really talented. He's a bruiser, but he can also leap over players, and he's shifty in the open field. That in Shanahan's system is going to be really, really valuable and really, really dynamic. So I'm excited for what Trey Sermon can do. And if he falls to me at the 11-11, I'm absolutely pulling the trigger there. But I'm taking Tevin Coleman here, and the ADP does not promote or like that pick at all. But here's what I'm going to tell you about Tevin Coleman. Right now, he's the first string running back on the the New York Jets. Wow. Their depth chart. And there's players like Michael Carter who are actually being taken before Tevin Coleman, and he's the third string back on the depth chart right now on ESPN, which is released by the teams. So we see Michael Carter go there. I could have put the handcuff pairing together, but Michael Carter's really shifty, really elusive, really nice to have as a receiving back in a PPR league, but he's not going to be a workhorse 3-down back type player. He might be a 3rd-down back, but he's not going to be a 3-down back this year, in my humble opinion. So I think Tevin Coleman's the guy to have in this backfield for right now. Technically, I think it's Ty Johnson is the second stringer. I might be wrong on that. Maybe it's LaMichael Pirine. It's one of the two. But regardless, Tevin Coleman, if he's healthy, he's going to be on the field, and that first lead back for this team. That at least gives me some reassurance here, and I can use Tevin Coleman as trade bait because I don't expect him to play more than just over half the games because of injuries and whatnot. And who knows, maybe Michael Carter comes out in camp and shows out, and by week 6, they're ready to give him the reins to that backfield. But for the time being, Tevin Coleman is the more valuable player on draft day. Unfortunately, Trey Sermon didn't fall to me too far there. He ended up going at the 11-1, so maybe a better long-term play. But I think on draft day, if you're looking for some nice trade bait, Tevin Coleman or an immediate starter, and especially with his risky running back crew, I think Tevin Coleman's a solid guy to go with here. So I got to look at this crew of guys that we've got left here as a whole and just kind of figure out what my team needs at this point. So once again, we went early tight end and wide receiver, kind of illustrating how that plays out for the rest of your roster. Here's the roster at the bottom of your screen. You can check out how that's played out to this point. I still do need to draft a defense at some point, but we're basically down to filling up backup positions, getting extra flex players, getting extra receivers and running backs. I do need another quarterback at some point, and I could consider a tight end, but Travis Kelce is basically going to be a every week starter for this team. It might be nice to go out and get a Kirk Cousins, very, very underrated passer, especially in fantasy. He was a top 12 finisher last year. Even a Trevor Lawrence can be productive this season, so some good options there. Wow, Deshaun Watson's ADP is really tanked. I like the idea of a Nelson Aguilar here. Not too in love with any of those tight ends. This is basically just turning into me picking the players from my must-own running backs and receivers videos. So, Nelson Aguilar, right now, there's rumors about Julio going to the Pats, but nothing official yet. So, I think that eventually, if we figure out where Julio's going, and even if it is the Patriots, honestly, all the better. That's a tough defensive division. Aguilar, I think, is a really nice number 2, but he played the number 1 role last year for the Raiders, and he was really productive. Didn't need much volume to put in a lot of work. He wasn't a 1,000-yard guy, but if I remember correctly, he didn't even have 50 catches. So he was a player who was a deep threat, scored long balls, touchdowns, and he was a pretty darn good wide receiver 2 or flex player here in the 11th round at the back end of that. That's pretty valuable, and I think a guy who has a really nice upside for teams, so I would absolutely advocate for that pick there. Here at the 12-12, I could pick Gronk. That might be decent. He's a touchdown guy. If something happens to Kelce, I would at least feel good about my tight end room. But there's a lot of receivers I'd like. I don't love carrying 2 tight ends in the roster, and the position is getting increasingly deeper, but the overall upside in the group of elite players still is not that large. I'm not loving the other guys I see on that list, though. I'll do it here. Maybe you can call this an overinvestment, and I don't love the draft pick at all. Honestly, I don't love this roster at all. I do like a lot of the players I've taken here, but again, take a running back in the first 2 rounds. I wanted to show what it looked like if you went other positions, and sometimes a late RB strategy is called an RB0. I didn't quite do that. I didn't wait until the 5th round to take a running back or anything, but by waiting until the 3rd round to take a running back, it really made my group a bit risky, and while there is really nice upside, like I've said multiple times, I don't love that risk factor. I think you're better off just taking one guy at the top of the board and resting on your laurels of having at least one solid back to depend on every week. I think that at the end of the day, this team would be fine because there's a really great upside all over the rest of the roster, but it just could get a little bit hairy if injuries start happening and whatnot. You're probably hoping for a really clean injury slate for this team if you're rolling with these guys in fantasy. So we're in round 13 now. Not too much longer to go in this mock draft. I should probably, let's see, what do I got here? 4 running backs. It would be nice, but here we're looking at, once again, the depth is already gone. There's not too many great investments here at the running back position, especially left on this draft board. For the most part, we're looking at rookie flyers that might see some playing time after midseason. But for the most part, I'm stuck with riding with these 4 guys until anything else comes out that I can potentially hope for. Mims, Hardman, Kirk, Campbell, Lazard, and Rashad Bateman. Those are my best options here. Once again, I've got a strong receiving core. I've got time to wait for these players to develop, so I'm going to take Rashad Bateman here. I think this is the best all-around receiver the Ravens have on the roster as a rookie right now. I've compared him to Devontae Adams, and Adams was a bit of a late bloomer. It took him till about year 3 to finally realize his potential, but maybe Bateman, just in the nature of that offense, can develop a bit quicker. They're not a super pass-happy team, so if he gets work, hopefully he can be efficient and productive with it. Again, this is a 13th round pick, nearly the 14th round. It's not going to kill your team, but it very well could make your team if you end up hitting on the selection here. And I see down here Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore, 2 more guys with super high upside as rookies that could come in and take a really strong stranglehold of a wide receiver 2 spot on a roster and end up having really productive years. So I don't love picking some of these vets who we already know who they are, and maybe they've had their best fantasy season that we'll see from them, because we already know they're not wide receiver 1s. Christian Kirk will not be a receiver 1. Paris Campbell will not be. Mecole Hardman will not be. Mims, maybe. Mims is a maybe here. He could potentially have some nice upside, but we don't ultimately know whether or not that'll be the case. Some more quarterbacks left here. I should probably take one, but since I waited a bit too long, I'll probably wait until next round to address that spot. Maybe I take one more running back here. A player I actually really like is Kenneth Gainwell, so that's what we'll go with here, because these other guys are vets. We know that they're not starters. There is a chance here. I've taken a lot of rookies in this draft, but ultimately that gives you a ton of upside in fantasy. Maybe your team doesn't peak until the end of the season, but that's when you want your team to peak. A lot of times, rookie players put on their best show at the end of their rookie season in the National Football League. They don't see a lot of playing time. They come out on the back end super fresh. They have a lot of yards, a lot of production. We saw that with Jonathan Taylor last year. He was ridiculous. Justin Jefferson was really great at the end of the season last year. There's just a lot of ways things can play out here. So Kenneth Gainwell, absolutely, I do not have any intentions of him starting for my roster before like week 10 on this team. But if Miles Sanders goes down, who's had some injuries in the past, nothing significant, but a lot of hamstrings, a lot of ankles and whatnot, stuff that gets you dinged up, Kenneth Gainwell might come in and be pretty productive. He's really, really shifty, super elusive. He even plays in the slot. He's a really good receiving back. And I think he can come in there and mimic what Sanders does well for that team. So again, just finding more value here in these late rounds, finding players who have high upside, could be something special for teams, and ultimately get us to where we want to be, and that's the fantasy championship at the end of the year. Again here, another upside pick. I'm going to go with Justin Fields here. It's between him and Derek Carr, but long term, I think that what gives you high upside here is taking these rookie players. Jalen Hurts is off auto draft, ended up being my quarterback for this fantasy team. He's got a week 14 bye, I believe, if that's what that is referring to. That's a late bye week. If you need a player to wait and sit and kind of develop here, Justin Fields might not play right away. And the reports right now out of Chicago camp is that they want him to play and that he might start sooner rather than later. But he's not going to come out there and just destroy the opposing defenses on day one. It might take him a month to get settled in and to figure out what he's doing and to become a productive player. And that's just fine. I don't need him until then. He can sit down there on my bench, even in a redraft league, develop, figure out his way in the league, and become a better player. And at the end of the day, if he ends up figuring that out by week 12, 13, 14 when I need him on my team for some high upside come fantasy playoff season, he'll be ready to go, I think, and he gives me a chance to have a really strong backup quarterback option, and regardless, there's probably going to be some strong waiver wire pickup options as well if we look at some of these vets that are out there. So find your upside late in the draft. You're not looking to go with a safe player like a Derek Carr here. Derek Carr's nice, but he lost his best receiving threat from last year, and he's got a second-year player in Henry Ruggs who we still don't really know who he is. So Derek Carr's nice, but I don't trust that offense at the end of the day, especially as a passing attack. Okay, 16th round. We got 4 picks left. I should probably invest into, like I talked about, running back maybe one more time. We've obviously got Kenneth Gainwell in here as my RB5 on this team. And this is a bit of a deeper bench unit, so maybe your draft only goes 16 rounds, and you should go maybe a defense here because we don't have one. But I want to show just a little bit more of these players and what they have to offer for fantasy teams if you do have a deeper draft class, and maybe some sleepers to be aware of and keep your eye out for on the waiver wire if you are going to do that and have that option in your leagues to potentially want to come out here and find some of these guys that could be big-time producers. Week 1 is always the most lucrative time for free agent players on the waiver wire who come out. They break out in the early weeks of the season. You figure out who they are. Last year it was James Robinson, and then all of a sudden it clicks, and they're every week starter for your fantasy team. So I'll go Elijah Moore here, get another receiver. Again, high upside, playing with a rookie QB and Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson's a playmaker. Get outside the pocket, throw the ball down the field. Elijah Moore is a playmaking slot guy. He's going to go down the field, stretch the field, and ultimately come up with big plays. So I think that's a pretty good duo that can put up some nice fantasy numbers. I think I'll dabble in the running back market 1 or 2 more times here with these last couple picks. And Le'Veon Bell, we know who he is. Doesn't have a team right now. Past his prime. Malcolm Brown for Miami, don't love that at all. Justin Jackson, he's a handcuff. Darrington Evans is a handcuff, who I do like and who has some question marks around him right now. But again, super high upside is Chuba Hubbard. And that's what the pick's going to be here. This has basically turned into a rookie fest. I don't know how many straight rookies I've picked, like 5. Chuba Hubbard playing for the Carolina Panthers. Christian McCaffrey had so many injuries last season. And in the open field, Chuba Hubbard is very explosive. He's hard to get a hold of in the open space. If you do get first contact on him, he'll probably go down because he's not a bruising back. But nonetheless, this is a player who, look at Mike Davis last season. He had very, very relevant fantasy value as a player who is not that talented in the open field and is kind of just a bowling ball, like a CJ Anderson type player. And Chuba Hubbard comes in as a young rookie. He's got fresh legs. And again, I said it, he's really, really explosive. So I think here that makes a lot of sense there. And with all of these teams picking defense, we had some value fall to us with a run that went on that position. Here, I'm probably going to take defense before stuff gets too thin here. I'll go San Francisco. I don't know why they always fall this far, but give me Nick Bosa back. I don't love to talk about defenses too much, but Nick Bosa on that pass rush are going to be a lot to handle. I think that'll play out pretty well, and we can maybe get back to that 2019 49ers defense. One last pick here. I'm going to go with the skill position player. I do believe I ended up taking at least one reserve player for every position, which is pretty nice. Maybe I come out here. I got Zach Wilson on the board still. Here's what I'll do. There are a lot of players I like as prospects here, a lot of rookie players that I'll be doing draft profiles on here in the coming days. I'm going to take Cam Newton here, and the reason for this is I've already got my developmental player in Justin Fields. I've already got a ton of rookies on my team that I know what their ceiling and their upside can be. I'm going to take one quarterback option who can potentially be a starter for me in the scenario that I have an injury to Jalen Hurts. I need someone to start for my team right away. Regardless of what the situation is, it's nice to have a few veterans on your bench that you can plug in, and they might not have super high upside, although Cam does have a nice rushing ceiling and goal line production there. It's nice to have that security blanket, and maybe I don't carry 3 quarterbacks the whole season. Maybe your league doesn't have enough roster spots to even do so, but at the end of the day, I do think it's advantageous here to take a quarterback in the late rounds. I don't think any of these other players who went after him are all that more valuable. So that was the 11th spot in today's draft, and we will see you next time. Alrighty, there you have it. That was my latest installment of the off-season mock draft series that I do here on the channel. Remember, if you've got a selection and order on the draft board that you would like me to do in next week's video, put that down in the comment section below, and I will schedule that up for a future mock draft episode. And make sure to go check out some of those other videos I've been putting out about the rookie class, about some of these players I'm projecting for next season. And I'll see you guys next time. I've been Gavin. You've been watching Sizzle Fantasy Sports, and I'll see you at the top of next week. See you later.